Hello, everyone. Thank you. This is a huge group, very unexpected, very, hugely excited to be here. Oh, hi, guys. So I used to live in Rochester for a long time, 16 years. I ran several businesses here. So when I was in pharma R&D, I actually was based here. And so it's a pleasure to come back and visit. But then I'm going to go back to the sunshine after this. So let me see. Okay, it's gonna. Can I take it? Yeah, you can pull it out. All right. Okay, this is better. So because I also want to see. So my talk today, I want to say, I don't want to blackpill anyone or cause despair or anything. I'm going to talk about, some difficult issues, but the previous speakers already actually set it up for me very well. I'm going to talk about several centuries-old scams that have been pulled on us, and that's why we're experiencing, or some of the main reasons why we're experiencing so-called chronic disease epidemic. It has nothing to do with our lifestyle, really. Our lifestyle actually should be making us healthier and more longer living, but it has to do with people behind the scam. And so I'll show you some of the foundational things that have been done. And I want to say, so do I? Yeah, and I give you a trigger warning. All unpopular opinions are my own. And I have a lot of them. Don't throw chairs at me. I am just saying, let's keep open mind. We're about alternatives, and alternatives start with evaluating the reality and trying to build the most accurate picture of reality that we can possibly do. So today, if you are a normie, which probably none of you are, you wouldn't be here. But you remember yourself being a normie, and if you were asked, what's the top causes of chronic disease in the modern world, in the Western world, and according to the Western science, we're baffled. That's number one reason. We're baffled. If we're pressed for it, it's everything. It's everything. So it's either we don't know, we're baffled, or it's everything. For example, in California, where I flew from, we have this Proposition 65, which will put cancer warnings on anything, on Starbucks cups. I found it on a package of walnuts. You can find it on the gas station, the stickers. You can anywhere. You will walk in a kitchen cabinet, there will be a sticker saying, this can cause cancer. So I'm telling you, they want you to think, cancer is lurking everywhere, at any age, expected at any time. Now, of course, there's a lot of propaganda in shows and movies showing that, cancer in a 20-year-old is totally fine. This is expected, right? This should be like that. No, it shouldn't be like that. That's a lie. So that's a complete lie. If everything else fails, they'll blame smoking, alcohol. Yes, there is some truth to that. They're definitely contributing factors, I can tell you that. So the lifestyle risks definitely contribute, but they're not the cause, and I'll show you how. Also blame diet, water, pesticides, blame everything. But it's definitely not vaccines, right? Definitely not. We're baffled, it's everything, but not vaccines. That's how the chronic disease epidemiology today works, right? And if you read literature, this is what you're going to find, or just read popular news sites. And if you, as a doctor, deviate from any of this, you get prosecuted. You get prosecuted. You get harassed. If you insist on finding the truth, you're going to get kicked out of the profession and prosecuted. Also, if everything of this fails, it's your incorrect genes. So we're going to blame you, the victim. And by the way, this is a known propaganda tactic called DARVO. So you deny attack, and then you reverse victim and offender. This is very, very, very known technique, and they're using it. So we deny, we blame something else, then we blame you for having incorrect genes. So that's how it works today in modern science. Now, oops, it's a little bit, okay. So formatting got a little bit incorrect. Oh, is it? All right. So now I'm going to talk about just a few things because I limited time, and I'm not going to present all the information, but I refer in my presentation to my Substack, and you can follow me on Substack, and everything I'm discussing today, I've written numerous articles with sources and documentation. So I want to talk first about anaphylaxis. This is a very, very long scam. It's over 100 years old, this particular science manipulation. So anaphylaxis today, again, in most common medical knowledge, if you ask what is anaphylaxis, they'll say, oh, it's a shock. It's a reaction, somebody's blood pressure drops unexpectedly, usually reaction to something, sometimes to medicine, and so they will, pass out from this reaction. I actually witnessed it walking into a Safeway pharmacy during COVID. There was a young man having an anaphylactic shock right in front of me because they were vaccinated with the COVID shot. Everybody was walking around him like nothing was happening. Oh, his vaccine card was like right next to him. That's why I knew what was going on. Everyone was walking around like nothing was happening. But that's the only anaphylactic shock, and I'm not a healthcare practitioner, the only anaphylactic shock I witnessed myself is that. And so, but medical people think that this is just that. It's not just that. That's not true. It's not extremely rare shock reaction. It's anything from mild rash to shock. Mild rash allergy to shock is anaphylaxis. It also occurs naturally, which is true. You may know about it, the bee sting anaphylaxis or jellyfish sting anaphylaxis. Some people will develop it. So naturally it happens. It may be, I've written a very long article about it. It may actually explain much better the mass epidemics like the plague. It much better explained by anaphylaxis versus bacteria or viruses. But that's a longer discussion, and there is an article on my Substack explaining how that works. And then it's also, if that happens, if anaphylaxis happens during some medical intervention, they say, oh, it's very rare, it's paradoxical, we can't explain it, we don't understand it, which is not true. And I'm going to show you why. It was very well characterized by Charles Richet over 100 years ago, and he received the Nobel Prize for it. And today, this is not taught in medical schools at all. So Charles Richet was a French researcher, and in 1913 he received the Nobel Prize for discovering and characterizing the effects of anaphylaxis. He worked in animals. He wasn't a good guy. He was the member of the eugenics club. It was a fashionable upper society attitude at the time, but he strongly believed in eugenics. He worked for the Prince of Monaco first. When he started working on this anaphylaxis research, Prince of Monaco took him on his yacht to study man of war, a very dangerous jellyfish. And so they were studying toxin of this jellyfish. Eventually, Charles Richet realized that he doesn't actually need to have this very dangerous toxin obtained and very difficult to obtain. He could produce it with very, very common benign materials very reliably. So his Nobel Prize acceptance speech is available online. You can find it on the Nobel Prize website. And I advise everyone to read it. It will open your eyes to so many things, especially if you're in alternative healthcare. This is the speech to read, and also I read his book. So these quotes are this is from his speech, and I'll show quotes from his book. His book is also available for free online. It's not a very long book, but it describes all his experiments and his conclusions. So in his speech, he said that basically anaphylaxis is defense mechanism of the body that develops to proteins especially, but not only proteins, but complex molecules such as proteins when they get directly into the bloodstream. we're designed in such a way to prevent this from happening ever. So when we, receive nutrients by digestive tract, they get digested, deconstructed into small molecules. Only that passes into the bloodstream, and the body then assembles its own proteins or whatever building blocks is going on. But when you introduce outside proteins, foreign proteins, directly into the bloodstream, then you set off this reaction of anaphylaxis. It's not 100% of the time. That's the problem with it, because it's actually a fairly small percentage of people who will develop it to certain interventions, but it's impossible to predict. And that boils down to his whole research and for what he received Nobel Prize. By the way, after that Nobel Prize was awarded in 1913, if we had honest medicine establishment or public health establishment that really did care about human health, all vaccination attempts should have been stopped shortly after. Instead, I'm telling it to you today, 100 years after, and this is considered, a conspiracy, and I'm a misinformation spreader. I'm not a misinformation. He got a Nobel Prize, So now, so he said that anaphylaxis is a universal defense mechanism against penetration of heterogeneous substances in blood, whence they cannot be eliminated. So heterogeneous substances, typically it's proteins or mixtures of proteins and fats and complex foreign biological material. These are excerpts from his book. You can find it online. It's called Anaphylaxis, 1913. And so what he discovered, he wrote a bunch of summary points. He says, when he discovered that he didn't need the man-of-war jellyfish because he could reproduce the same things with very harmless substances, typically food. Anaphylaxis follows injection of non-toxics, harmless substances. They just need to be, so here that says albuminoid nature, which means protein. Today, albumins are most common ingredient of vaccines. Albumins are derived from cereals. They're derived from gluten, from wheat, from corn, rice, soy. This is why we have gluten allergies, soy allergies, rice, corn allergies. They all come from albumins. So this is number one. And then he also said that the trick is 2 injections. So the first one will set up the anaphylactic state. So at the first injection may or may not produce reaction. It may produce in some cases violent reaction, in some cases very, very mild. But then after a certain period of time, at the second shot, that individual will have a violent reaction and sometimes deadly. And the second injection may be very, very minute, maybe much less than the first, very diluted. So that's the effect that he was looking to characterize. And he worked in animals all of the time. So when he says albumins or proteins, or another word that's used, he used is crystalloid and colloid. So that's chemical terms. So we have substances that are simple salts, for example. They're called crystalloids in chemistry. So these things are typically safe to inject. The colloids are mixtures, so they're proteins, fat. They may contain salts. They may contain other chemical substances, and they're a complex mixture, suspension. And so milk is a classical colloid, and in fact, the blood is a colloid. The human body is a colloid. Anything where water carries proteins and fats and other substances in a combined manner is a colloid. So we have, so he says you can't inject colloids because they will produce anaphylaxis, at least in some individuals, and they'll subsequently produce allergies. And so the difference between the ingestion route and injection route is behind the scam of vaccines. So when they tell you, oh, it just contains, a simple fat. Oh, it's just peanut oil. It's very safe, so we don't need to test it as a pharmaceutical. So they're called these generally regarded as safe ingredients, GRAS. So those ingredients are never tested, and they inject them. But injection of those ingredients can be deadly. So for example, we can safely consume snake poison. And don't do it, but it's a... But it's a bush medicine, right? So we know if you're in the desert somewhere and got bit, you may want to like suck out the poison, and that's been used. So because we can safely digest it, but when it's injected, it's deadly. Same thing with milk. It's safe for us to consume, but if you inject it, milk or egg, you're going to set off an anaphylactic reaction in a whole bunch of population. Now, how much it varies. So this is just an estimate. It varies. It depends on the person. It depends, again, as I said, it's very unpredictable. There's it's a relatively small percentage. He quoted his colleague, so Charles Richet quoted his other colleagues who worked in the same area. And so they described that there are different types of reactions. You can have immediate reaction or delayed reaction depending on how far the first injection from the second injection. And so he found that, let's say, from between 10 days and 1 month, this is the split. So you'll have a lot of immediate reactions, but most of them will be non-deadly. So they'll be just reactions. And then you will have about 13% delayed reaction. So that the second allergic state or anaphylactic state will develop. And not surprisingly, to me, at least because I know this, today multi-dose vaccines are spread by 1 month, 3 weeks, 1 month. Why? Because they want to monitor this. They know this. This is them knowing what I'm telling you, but not telling us. This is how they kind of underhandedly monitor the level of anaphylactic reactions they set off in the population. Yeah. By the way, in the Pfizer FOIA, there was a report that they provided to the FDA in February of 2021, where a lot of you know what I'm talking about. That report where there were thousands of deaths, there were like 1,200 deaths, there were thousands, over 40,000 of severe reactions. There was a separate category of that report specifically to track this. It's anaphylaxis. And they wanted to see what the percentage that they were setting off, because it's a monitoring thing for them. Now, so just to illustrate how anaphylaxis, as I said, it's not 100% and it is unpredictable and upfront. So there is a first shot of something that contains proteins, fats, other ingredients. There's thousands of things that can be, let's say, in vaccines and injections. So you inject this population with the first shot. After about 20 days of development, some of them are now in anaphylactic state, but you can't, you can't tell until you have the second encounter with that substance. And then there is a second injection on the vaccination schedule, because a lot of multi-dose vaccines are, spread by 3 weeks. And there may be some people that will have anaphylactic reactions detectable, and they will summarize them in those reports, as I said, like Pfizer did. But we'll say, oh, it's just rare. They will quote, oh, your child had a paradoxical reaction, or your child had a reaction. They always, as I say, victim blame. Well, they just, or maybe it's genetic. Maybe, maybe they have some rare genes and we need to study it. So those are responses you're going to get. But then there's going to be a large percentage of the population that will be pushed into allergic state. So it's not quite as severe as an anaphylactic shock, but as Richet said, they're all the same. He said you shouldn't call them allergies even. He was against calling it allergy. He said it's anaphylaxis, it's all the same thing. So they are now allergic to whatever substances they were in the shot, or even oftentimes they cross-react. So you can have cross-reactions to different proteins because proteins are similar to each other. So now these people have allergic or autoimmune conditions. So if severe enough, they will develop autoimmune conditions. And as you know, a lot of chronic disease starts in the gut, and anaphylaxis starts in the gut. It's a reaction of the gut. when the body is trying to rapidly get rid of offensive material, the toxins, the offending foreign proteins, the body tries to get rid of it quickly by essentially, that's why we have the shock. The ultimate thing is, the blood pressure drops because in the gut we have dilation. The body is trying to get rid of the fluids. You drop the blood pressure, and the person, can collapse. So that's what it starts in the gut, and then it damages the gut because they created an allergy now to gluten, for example. And as you know, a lot of gluten allergies, and I have gluten allergies in my family because of vaccinations, they are, it can take decades to diagnose. Sometimes and if it's a baby, well, the baby is crying and having a diarrhea, but you don't know why, and you go like crazy trying to do food elimination diets and all that because you're chasing this, and this is very, very difficult to chase. And of course, repeat this with 90+ injections. This is, you're guaranteed, like at some point you're guaranteed to get it. Even if as I said, the problem with that, it's not 100% of the population, it's something like 10% of the population, or maybe less, depending on what was in the shot. But because it's repetitive, continuous, you're guaranteed to get it. That's why all the chronic diseases rise in perfect correlation with increases on the CDC vaccination schedule and removal of all the religious exemptions and personal exemptions and medical exemptions, and in perfect correlation. And the states that are the most draconian about it, like California, for example, now has the highest chronic burden in children, and something incredible like 1 in 20 children is autistic now. And that's purely, you can always correlate it perfectly with how hard they're coming down on vaccines and delicensing doctors and so forth. So this is completely undeniable. Now, coming back to mice. So I've written an article about this. There's a full article on Substack about this because I was so, I don't know, I was just triggered by constant propaganda that it's everything, it's food, it's, EMF. And I mean, I'm not saying that those things are benign, or even glyphosate. I even reviewed there was a big study from Italian researchers published and advertised everywhere saying this proves glyphosate causes cancer. So trace glyphosate in food or cereal or causes cancer. And it was a very large study, very well done. It was huge. It was in rats. It was about 1,000 rats that they were testing various doses of glyphosate in water. And what that study showed, that it's extremely difficult to cause cancer by eating glyphosate. If you translate, and animal studies are not 100% translatable to humans, but if you translated findings to humans from the rats, well, you would need to have glyphosate with your morning coffee every day of your life since you were born at about 100x of the regulatory limits, and then you have 4% chance of getting cancer. Okay, so yes, you can cause cancer by glyphosate, but very, very difficult. Now, and so I come from the pharmaceutical research and development, and in pharmaceutical research and development, we use animal studies to do a lot of safety and pharmacology studying and risk evaluation before the drug can be studied in human volunteers in clinical trials. Obviously, this is done to remove the risk. And so there is a big necessity in, it's this called preclinical research. So all the animal research is called preclinical research. In preclinical research, there is a big necessity to generate animal models of disease. So if the disease that you want to study, you want to have an animal with this disease reliably. And there are commercial providers that are breeding the animals with particular target disease condition to sell to different labs that do pharmaceutical research. Now, of course, for commercial purposes, you want reliability. You want to produce, you can't just sit around and wait forever until the animal gets old, develops cancer, and then it's too old to conduct an experiment. So what they have done in that industry is figuring out, like, how can we actually cause cancer in animals? And they've succeeded very well. So the industry, the commercial breeding of mice for clinical research goes back to 1800s. In 1800s, it was all about selective inbreeding. So they would just try to selectively inbreed different mice strains and find the ones that would get, like, you know, really damaged and produce cancer. But it wasn't reliable. It took a long time, wasn't reliable, wasn't guaranteed success, so you'd have to do multiple attempts and so couldn't guarantee commercial success. Then later on, you know, now in the 20th century, all these like knock-in, knock-out GMO models got developed. And that was a little bit more reliable, but again, most of the GMO, again, and there's a lot of conversations about GMO, that's for a later date, I write about it sometimes, but GMO also basically boils down to selective breeding. And it's a bit more predictable, but not as well predictable as you'd think. Now, the modern method is the mice vaccination schedule. That's when it became very reliable. When they figured out that you can actually, you know, so you need 2 hits, but the first hit is vaccination. The first hit, they need to set up some sort of anaphylaxis that will produce, you know, allergy, and the mouse will eventually develop a cancer. And then you can subsequently, you know, enhance it by feeding toxins. So I'm not saying like toxic food should be avoided, of course, but it's because there is a combination. There's a combination contributing factor. But as I said, it's impossible to induce cancer by food alone. And they know to inject them first and inject as early as possible. So they inject the babies, they inject the pregnant mice with various chemicals. And these are the chemicals that are also found in vaccines, including ethanol. You know, so for example, one of the methods is to inject then chemical and then feed high-fat diet afterwards, or feed ethanol afterwards, and so that's how they induce them. And the most reliable method today is transgenic oncogene expression models. It's a little bit, I don't know, got formatted wrong. So transgenic oncogene expression models, where they're using synthetically produced DNA and RNA, which, one of my unpopular opinions, has nothing to do with life, and I'll show you why, but it's a synthetic chemical. So they produce synthetic chemicals that are known to enhance this process and make it more rapid and make it more unstoppable. And interestingly, these items that I was listing here, SV40, was a component of the Pfizer COVID shot. And the SV40 is a component of, or pretty much, it's a common component of what's called today gene therapies, because of this propensity to rapidly enhance and spread into cells and keep, you know, replicating. Now, and so I want to, I'm close to the end of my presentation. So when I was saying, you know, the synthetic RNA and DNA have nothing to do with life, they're not compatible. In the same article where I wrote about reliably causing cancer in mice, I wrangled with ChatGPT and I asked it, you know, I'd like to build a virus in my garage. Can you... Can you give me the list of raw materials that I need? And of course, it reported me to all the agencies for potential terrorism. And I said, no, I'm kidding. I said, no, I just need a list of raw materials. I said, partial list will be okay. I don't need the know-how. I'm not like trying to you know, do Breaking Bad here. And so eventually it coughed up the list of ingredients that are used to make synthetic DNA and RNA, which is what they claim is in the COVID shots, and they also claim in all these, wonderful gene therapies that, now Pfizer is selling to cure cancer, to correct your incorrect genes, to do all that. So the list of chemicals goes like this. All right, some more, and then I was like, well, I'm not a chemist, but this strikes me as very hostile to life. And ChatGPT said, okay, let me help you. I'll tell you what it contains. So it contains flammables, corrosives, bases, oxidizers, peroxide formers, halogenated solvents, and calotropes. Calotropes are the chemicals that are denaturing the DNA and denaturing proteins. So none of this is compatible with life. They're claiming that they're making synthetic building blocks of life and they will fix your incorrect genes with this. No, they're just injecting a gigantic amount of chemicals. And so none of this is compatible with life. This is incidentally is made by chemical companies. So places like Kodak and Fuji are all of a sudden big biomanufacturing facilities. Why? Well, because they're experts at making this kind of stuff, right? So they found their next life in this space, and so that's what I want to tell you. The industry is incredibly corrupt, and they're also based on the models of medicine that completely failed. So even if they were not corrupt, they're believing that out of this junk, they can make something alive and breathing. And not only that, they can actually improve life. This is as insane as it gets. I mean, obviously, this is just poison. So my point here is we should avoid so we should avoid vaccines, traditional vaccines, and the newer ones, because they're full of chemicals, because this anaphylactic cycle will set off all kinds of chronic diseases. So as I said, vaccines typically contain, in addition to the modern ones containing all these chemicals, they also contain all these food proteins that nobody's testing for safety because they're believed to be safe by definition, but they're not. So they contain peanut oil, seed oils, albumins, yeast proteins, egg, gelatin, fish, shellfish, cholesterol, recombinant proteins made of that junk. So any one of these can anaphylactize you to any of that. It's an intestinal reaction. Then you develop leaky gut, inflammation, destruction of microbiome, destruction of neurotransmitters leading to autism, but not only autism, dementia is also Alzheimer's, all of that, Parkinson's. And ultimately, it's a Russian roulette, right? So you do it 90 times, you're guaranteed to win. I want to finish by saying this is one study that I've interviewed the authors, and so I'm very familiar with the data set. This was a survey conducted by the group. They call themselves the control group. They found completely unvaccinated people in the United States. They exist. So they found 1,500 completely unvaccinated people in the United States. And then they compared the incidence of chronic disease in that population. And they were across age groups, so from young people to their people in their 80s. And they compared to the background incidence of chronic disease in this population versus general population in the United States. And what they found is astounding. So one chronic condition in children, or at least one chronic condition in adults at any age, the incidence was about 5% for unvaccinated. So throughout the entire lifespan, there's about 5% rate of some chronic disease, any chronic disease, and there's lots and lots that they were asking about. Versus we now have, well, these are actually probably dated statistics now, because this was done before mRNA rollout, but very, very huge differences, up to 45x difference. versus unvaccinated. What more importantly, ADHD, 0 in adults, in unvaccinated, and nearly 0 in children. ADHD, yeah, ADHD. The incidence of cancer in adults and children, 0 in unvaccinated. Right? Because of the mechanisms as I was showing you, right? The diabetes is 0 in unvaccinated. And heart disease is 0 in unvaccinated, and it's #1 killer, right? #1 chronic disease, #1 killer, cancer is #2, right? So, and then the rest with developmental disabilities, learning disabilities, speech disorders, and things like arthritis, asthma, autism, obviously, and birth defects. So as you can see, I'm harping on the point that vaccines are #1 problem, #1 starter of it's a feeder. That's why the establishment industry protects vaccines so much, and they will go to end of the earth to try to defend it. But the cancer feeds, so the vaccines are starter, and the cancer industry is harvester. So that's why it's such a difficult place, and that's why they will prosecute the doctors, they will fight us, they will call us, they will put us on terrorist watch list, and they will go after everything because we're attacking this establishment model. And it needs to stop, and that's why we need places like this, and we need environments, and it's wonderful that this is a private member association because we can speak freely, and they can't come after us or after establishment or anything like that. And so I'm very happy that you guys invited me, and thank you for your attention, and yeah, questions? She was asking because the totally unvaccinated was 1,544. 1,544 people totally unvaccinated at all ages, and then compared to general incidence in the United States of the same disease. All right, so thank you very much.